Hi, everyone, and welcome to our panel session today with Deutsche Bahn, talking about the interactions between learnings from software bills of material that we're talking about a lot in the rest of the conference and hardware bills of material. How, when you run a real supply chain, trains that move real things around, what can we learn both ways in software? Our guest today. We're joined by Max Mehl of DB Deutsche Bahn Systel, which is the IT partner for Deutsche Bahn, and a longtime open source and free software participant. And Erik Schaufuss, who is in the expert governance, has a title of expert governance in the security and rolling stock group at Deutsche Bahn. Going to mispronounce this. Fernverkehr, which is the long distance travel group inside of Deutsche Bahn. And the two of them are working on things like SBOMs and HBOMs. So we're going to hear Erik explain a little bit about what HBOMs are. Why don't the two of you tell us a little bit more? We can start with Max. Tell us a little bit more about Deutsche Bahn, its structure, and your different roles within the organization.
Yeah, sure. I can start with that, at least with what I can talk about. So Deutsche Bahn is Germany's railway operator and also Europe's largest infrastructure owner. So we are talking about quite some thing here. Yes, our mission basically is to bring things from A to B, people, but also goods. So we do a lot of that, and since quite a long time. So what I'm doing is that as you said, I'm working with the internal IT partner of Deutsche Bahn. So we provide IT expertise and services to the other companies within Deutsche Bahn. We are quite federated. So Deutsche Bahn in total has roughly 600 companies. So that's quite a big organization. But of course, some of them are larger as than the others. So I work with DB Systel. We have around 6,000 employees. And I'm not sure about DB Fernverkehr, but it's also a quite large organization. And actually, I work with the CTO of DB Systel and responsible there for all things open source. And supply chain is one of my topics that I work about, since we have a lot of, as the audience knows, a lot of dependencies on open source software. So we need to keep track of what we are actually using, about its security, its license compliance, and so on. And this is where I met Erik, because at Deutsche Bahn, we cannot only think about software. We are not a pure software company, but we also have a lot of rolling stock and hardware. And our goal is always to think of things in the most broadest sense, so that it helps the whole company. So one of the things is that we also need to keep track of hardware, and this is where Erik came in a project that we work together with. So Erik, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. As you already mentioned, my name is Erik Schaufuss. I'm working at DB Fernverkehr, long distance travel branch of the Deutsche Bahn. So all those trains, white trains, red stripe, belong to us. High-speed trains for the most part, and that's where I'm located. I'm located at the CISO-Department of DB Fernverkehr, and I'm responsible with another colleague to get the information security for the rolling stock on a good level. That's my responsibility.
And how did you find out about software bills of materials? And I mean, you must have had a notion of bills of materials, but these new standards like SPDX and Cyclone, was that internal discussions, or how did you find out about those?
Yeah, until today, the software and the hardware supply chain management for our trains was mainly driven by functional engineering view. So there are some software lists and something like CAD drawings and so on, parts lists, but those bill of materials are in a supplier unique format, and we got problems with that because the suppliers use different engineering systems, and they always deliver a specific PDF or an Excel spreadsheet, but no standardized machine readable format. So that's the pain point we've come to when we wanted to include our trains into our asset management system.
Mm. So a standard was a really helpful. I mean, you must have hundreds or thousands of suppliers, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like one of the things from talking with you all, one of the things that feels very familiar across both the software and hardware sides is that there are so many different suppliers. The complexity of that supply chain is very high. Are you, I mean, it sounds like, of course, you're working to advance the state of the management of these supply chains. Is the hardware side learning from the software side learning from the hardware side, going both ways, you think?
Yeah. I think I would say either side is learning from each other. From a mechanical engineering perspective, we already got super detailed list of components, like a parts list down to every single screw. That level of detail is currently not so common on the software side. Vice versa, the software side is obviously way ahead in terms of digitalization and using like open standards to communicate information like SPDX and CycloneDX. So that's where we're coming from. And for us at the CISO-Department, it's an unsatisfactory situation where we currently are. So we wanted to change that.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, we get an overall software delivery once or twice a year from from the suppliers, including firmware software for each system or component in the train. And that's because there's a regulatory accreditation that's aligned to those safety relevant software. And we wanted to change that also so that we can patch systems like customer information, like Wi-Fi or something like that, way faster than a component that's safety relevant to us. And yeah, that's our goal for the next years.
Yeah, well, right. I'm sure change, and this is not. One of the things actually that I wanted to talk about is that there are, I think, different time scales that we think about, right? I mean, Max, we've talked a little bit about this. I mean, one of them is, of course, the security thing. The software industry is used to rolling out patches or would like to roll out patches. Of course, doesn't always work this way, but would like to roll out patches, in hours or days. And of course, because of safety certifications, I'm glad as an occasional rider on trains. I'm glad that there's more certifications there. I mean, Max, is there like a culture clash there sometimes between the two groups, or is that mostly, well understood?
I wouldn't call it clash. It's mutual learning, I'd say. So as you know, I mean, we've been talking about SBOMs for years now, much earlier than Log4 Shell or so. And this was the perspective for me, at least, watching things like SBOM just from the software side, and as you say, in a very short intervals. And I mean, it wasn't a big issue if we just redrafted the specification and had some breaking changes. I mean, let go by 1 or 2 years and everyone will adapt, right? And now here comes the learning, or like when I speak with people like Erik, when they say, well, we are now planning for a train generation that is coming in 10 or 15 years. And now we have to draft the specifications and the requirements that we give to our manufacturers, to the vendors. And these trains have to be in production for, I don't know how many years, 10, 20, 30 years. Like this is mind-blowing, at least for me, that we now have to settle on things that are not in 1 year, but in such a long time distance. But of course, it's also interesting to view the tool of SBOMs and what we've seen or understood as something that is just describing software for such a long time, at least for me, is now becoming such a diverse tool. Like we are not only tracking hardware, but we are tracking configuration, we are tracking software in different stages, right? In production, in testing, and so on. So that is at least for me a learning curve that perhaps would have happened anyway in the software world, but now combined with hardware and the different requirements that are in this area, this is very interesting. And yeah, I'd say we bring each other up to speed with what's happening in our field. And of course, we as the software people can contribute something. Like, as I said, we've been dealing with SBOMs for a much longer time and have perhaps more experience with some of these interesting things that we have to deal with. But in general, it's a mutual learning.
Well, I'm sure there are some I ran into yesterday in one of our customers a Java library that I am pretty sure is old enough to drink, even in the United States. And so some of these things are, um, I think the software industry would like to pretend that it's all quick updates, but of course, the reason we've been talking about SBOMs for 10 years now, right, is that we've realized 10 years ago that some of these systems do have a very long life, even when they're purely software. And of course, as you say, when we're talking about, I think that's the other sort of time mismatch, right? We have one time mismatch of software wanting to move very quickly, software moving more slowly. Erik, Max mentioned that you're talking about requirements for a train that will not be in service for many years, and then once it is in service, will serve for decades.
Yeah.
Hopefully. That is a very hard, that requires levels of planning and thoughtfulness that are very high, I would imagine.
Yeah. Currently, we focus on standards like IEC 62443, TS 50701, and ISO 27000. But we try to keep our systems as modular as we can, and our suppliers, so we can exchange them if it's necessary. Besides that, we try to pre-fit our trains for upcoming tasks like automated and remote train operation. So that's a thing we trying to already implement in our cars. The big goal for our new train sets is to get back to the bill of materials, to get a full view of each and every component, hardware and software in our trains. And we want those information machine readable, so we can use it in our newly introduced asset inventory system and the aligned newly developed governance, risk, and compliance tool. So we can monitor our digital assets better and see if there are some vulnerabilities there, and so we can handle those in a
right.
sort of time.
I mean, it seems like security, obviously, security and safety are intertwined, obviously, but it sounds like also simply just maintenance costs would also be an HBOM would help you with maintenance and making sure that things are more, I mean, obviously, hopefully more safe, but also, more efficiencies, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Currently, we are struggling a little bit with establishing a higher management attention on both sides, on our side and on the side of the suppliers. Trying to keep up with the increasing threat landscape that's on the transportation sector currently. According to the, I think in March, published NISA threat landscape report, the attacks will increase on our critical infrastructure and obviously foreseeable on operational technology that will be safety affected too. And that's a huge task we have to solve.
Oh, that's really interesting because the adoption of SBOMs in software is intimately tied to safety and security. I hadn't realized it would maybe have some of the same implications on your side. I was thinking more just wear and tear, but you're thinking about active threats as well.
Yeah,
That's really interesting. Max, Erik mentioned ISO standards, specifications, uh, and of course these longer timescales and regulation. Right, we're not used to the software world is not used to safety regulation. The software world, there are some parts of it that deal with ISO standards and things like that, but we tend not to think very much about standards for our mechanisms of production, right? We think a lot about standards for how do we communicate from piece of software A to B, but not how we build software A, not how we build software B. Do you think there are lessons about time, patience, standards, regulations that software developers can learn?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like the case where we are not so forward thinking in many cases. At least we haven't been. What I said, that we say we just rewrite the specification, and yeah, the industry will basically deal with it in the next 1, 2, 3 years, and that doesn't work in the area where Erik is working with. Yeah, I mean, in general, as you said, we haven't been used to regulation, and now things like the Cyber Resilience Act are coming, and we don't know exactly what we have to do and how we are affected, but it's certain that software will somehow be regulated, and I guess it's a good thing. And so, and now comes the understanding in the whole industry. I feel that we need to keep track of some of the things that we built in the past, and of software that we are using and dependencies that we are having, especially in the open source world, where we now perhaps also perceive our importance of keeping the whole ecosystem a little bit more healthy, right? That we cannot no longer just consume, but actually have to be part of it, either by contributing money or resources or whatever, which is quite normal in Erik's field, right? I mean, he has many direct relationships with suppliers, and this is a good thing in the sense that you have a contact now, and in the open source world, or in the software world, often this direct contact with maintainers has been neglected. So I feel that this understanding, or this realization that we have to deal with safety and security issues, have to deal with warranty, is now coming into the software world. And this is challenging, but I think it's very interesting, and we can, as I said, we can learn from other industries in this regard.
Well, it's interesting, what Erik said about what you were saying about contact with suppliers, and what Erik said about having to motivate suppliers, right? Like that is not, I think that's the case in all industries, right? Like how you work with. So on the one hand, we want everything to be more structured, more machine readable, but the people are still very important, right? The people do not become machines just because we put everything into XML, right? Well, let's talk about, we've talked about SBOMs, and Erik, we've sort of mentioned hardware bills of materials. We've mentioned SPDX, Cyclone DX. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're thinking about specific formats, and how you're again, what the hardware bill of materials folks have learned from software bills of materials?
Sure. Currently, we're looking at SPDX and Cyclone DX as two formats for software bill of materials. Together with Max, we only have a view on software bill of materials. Hardware bill of materials is something that we at DB Fernverkehr want to have for our next generation trains. And that's something Cyclone DX has to offer. So depending on the asset the supplier has to deliver, we will decide which standard is more suitable for them. For example, on a new train set, I would prefer Cyclone DX because it offers more holistic view over the hardware and software assets in that train, and also has the possibility to communicate vulnerabilities for those components that are included in the train. They have, I think, a high use case for us at security, at a security perspective. The hardware bill of materials is the thing that we didn't get until now from our suppliers. we always get an engineering bill of materials, like I mentioned, CAD drawings and part lists and something like that, or a manufacturing bill of materials. But the hardware bill of materials aligned to a software bill of materials or an operational bill of materials, those information we don't get at the moment, and that's something that's really worth it for our supervision of our assets.
Right. Oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't realized that Cyclone DX had specialized vocabulary and structure for hardware assets. I mean, that's obviously a huge win for you all. I mean, SPDX has grown very much out of, as Max I think could say more perhaps about, has grown very much out of the software industry, and so perhaps no surprise that there's a gap there. I think one of you mentioned at the very beginning, Max, that Deutsche Bahn is a very federated company. Hundreds of entities that work together, and of course, then the whole supply chain, right? Which I'm sure is again many hundreds or thousands of suppliers, some inside the company, some not. I think software developers often assume that hardware supply chains are easier because it's a big hierarchy. You just tell people what you want. Um, can you say a little more about this federated nature of the company, either one of you, and how that makes things, I assume, in some ways more robust, but perhaps occasionally some gray hair as well?
I mean, I cannot in general speak about federated companies. I know Deutsche Bahn, but what I learned is that at Deutsche Bahn, traditionally the companies that form this whole organization are quite strong in their own administration. So they have they often administer or maintain themselves a little bit more. And of course, we have central bodies especially for governance. But most of the stuff that can be done inside of these companies is done there, which is a good thing because it keeps the whole organization flexible. I mean, we have over 300,000 employees, and that perhaps in a completely strongly centralized company wouldn't be so flexible, and it keeps us competitive and also innovative in a sense. But the good thing is that we, over crossing these companies, can still work together, like Erik and I and the whole people that are working on supply chain in this specific project is a very good example for that. But of course, like, this federated nature makes it a little bit harder if you want to push for governance changes, right? So if we now come up with a great idea how we deal with a supply chain in the software and hardware world, and probably cannot just push it to all 600 companies. That wouldn't be possible. Perhaps it's a good thing because you get more feedback by others and you have to motivate and explain much better, and therefore also improve the solution that you're trying to push into the whole organization. So in the end, I think it's a good thing, but of course, perhaps it makes things a little bit slower and a little bit more complicated. But I'm not sure if we would be a completely strongly centralized company, if that would be better in this case.
Well, and that's where the modularity. Oh, sorry, you were saying, Erik?
Yeah, I said I don't think so. I think it's a good thing that we are a federated company, but each and every business unit is a single business unit and an independent business unit, and that makes some things easier. So we can get some requirements at DB Fernverkehr that, I don't know, another company of DB doesn't have to apply. But on the other side, it's obviously hard to get an corporate-wide view on things, because the business units have to go into information security board and something like that, and have to talk about that, and then there has to be a decision about if it's going to be rolled out company-wide or just for some business units.
Yeah, Sorry, if I just may add something. This federated nature makes things like supply chain management also quite interesting, because of course we as open source people would like to have a full overview of all open source components, modules that we are using in whole Deutsche Bahn. But that of course requires that these different parts of the organization actually adopt whatever solution we come up with, right? Yeah, we really have to think about to make it easy for teams to adopt whatever workflow we are establishing in order to manage even just software bill of materials and dependency tracking, right? So yeah, this really tries us to lower the threshold for teams, developers, and everyone else working with this supply chain.
Right. Well, and on the flip side, I would assume, Erik, you mentioned modularity. I mean, one of the sort of traditional business school answers when you have a complex organization like this is that the more modular you can make things, the easier it is to share information. So I'm sure you have hopes that once these things are more widely adopted, it will help all of these entities coordinate, I'm sure. Well, guys, this has been really terrific, and I hope really interesting for our. I mean, I would assume most of the folks who watch this talk are not going to go start a train company, but in case they do, will they know who to talk to? And if not, hopefully this has been really interesting for people in terms of helping them think through the benefits of modularity. What does it mean to impose or educate about standards? So I think this has been really interesting. Any final notes or comments from either of you? Anything that either you wish software developers knew about hardware, you wish hardware developers knew about software? No
Erik,
worries
would
if
you
not.
like to start, or?
No, you can start, Max.
Okay, no, it's not about this side. I think we've covered that well. It's more like like a call to the whole audience and perhaps also open source community that I noticed when working in this large organization of many companies and employees, that even we are too small to change things that are larger than we are, right? So we have to work together in order to solve the issues that we have, like with the different scopes that HBOM, SBOM, software, hardware, operation, security, and so on have. So I think we have to look over the rim of our teacups much more than we did even now or do even now. And this is what I noticed. That we have to cross borders here and keep working on understanding each other.
I mean, Erik, going to be hard to top that one. So if you don't have anything, that's fine.
I keep it short and simple. So I think a good recommendation is that the operational staff and the governance staff has to collaborate more, and that's I think a fruitful I don't know the English word. The fruitful outcome. So I keep it with that.
Well, I mean, I think that is short, but sweet and to the point, right? The audience here is certainly a mix of developers and business folks, and you're right. I mean, how we cross that gap is really important and really hard. Well, thank you both so much for your time. This has been really interesting, and I hope it helps some folks bridge those gaps. Really appreciate it.